Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the lesson Cultural Evolution. In this lesson, we are going to look at why things have changed and how in the last 100 years things have changed so much that we need to continuously adapt our organizations. At the end of this lesson, you should understand why business agility could be a solution for the up and coming changes, or really just the changes that have already happened till today. You'll also understand that it's not just business agility or nothing. There's some stages in between. And when you look at your business agility radar and you understand where your organization is on their evolution, you can sort of see some similarities between the stages that we're about to go through. The world has changed dramatically in the last 100 years. What we're finding though is even though human adaptability is amazing, as humans we can actually adapt to our environments, but due to technological changes, we're finding that how technology is improving is now much faster than our ability to adapt. So when we think about this, think about your organizations with their 3-year strategy. Think about your organizations who have rigid processes. As new technology and new cultural impacts happen, how is your organization going to adapt when you can't plan ahead? That you don't know what's to come. All you know is that what's going to happen is going to change things. Strategy allows an organization to be purposefully opportunistic. Mr. Ducker. So human evolution is this funny process that people think is quite linear, but it's not. It's not continuous, right? It's in stages. We make these great leaps of evolution, both in our DNA and in our culture. Now, there's a lot of debate regarding technology impacting culture or culture impacting technology. A lot of this course is actually about culture enabling technology. Okay, so keep that in mind. And remember as well, evolution is accelerating, both as a species and also as a culture. Frederick Taylor has a really good book called Reinventing Organizations. And he talks about infrared, magenta, red, amber, orange, green, and teal as stages in those evolutions. And what we want to kind of think about is how do we align that to our culture and how we make strategic positional plays for increasing our competitive advantage. Now, at every point that a stage jumps, everything changes. Political nature changes, police, the army, the structures, corporate, globalization, nationalization, it's all changing rapidly. So what we have to remember is if we are going from one stage to another, globally or even nationally, what we tend to find is that everything around that paradigm shifts. And what I want to talk about is the Kinetic Model and how that can kind of help us relate. And we have I think it's David Snowden who invented this. And to really simplify this, we have 5 quadrants: simple, complicated, complex, chaotic, and disorder. Disorder is that green area running through there. And I really like this model because what it does is it tends to simplify something very complex. And that is how, as a species and as an industry, things can change and be quite fluid. To have a think to yourself, simple. It's fixed constraints, best practice. You kind of know what you're meant to do, right? So think about things like brushing your teeth. Even things that are commodity driven. Making electricity. These are very simple things. They have best practices and you know your constraints. What about complicated? Can you think of a complicated industry right now? You may have a set of practices, governing constraints. One of the best examples of this I find is the accounting industry. In an accounting industry, you have the GAAP, which is a globally recognized system for accounting. And we have the IRD or IRS or similar taxation systems in every country. It's a complicated beast, but there's not many ways of doing things. You have to come to the same outcome. You need to have the management reports, you need to have your financial reports to provide taxation reports and to grow your company. You sense the problem, you analyze it, and then you respond, normally using some sort of good practices. Can you think of another one? Whereas complex is quite interesting. Complex is multifaceted, which means there are more than one way of doing things. And there are normally different outcomes you may actually get to. So normally we come along the lines of probing the problem or the industry, and then we sense what that probe has. So we tested it a little bit and we come back and we go, okay, that makes kind of sense. And then we respond. So we don't know the solution we may not be doing, so we can't really analyze it. So we're just sensing it. So they call this, emergent practice. Because in a complex environment, we can't have a standardized process because we don't know where things will flow. Imagine having a standardized process in, let's say, software generation in the 1990s, and things move, customers move, culture moves, technology moves. You're then going to rebuild all your processes. A lot of waste, and a lot of human potential waste as well. So other than obviously technology, complex environments can be anything that could nowadays be intermingling. So you have technology with medical gear, you've got airlines now becoming quite complex. Even though the airline value chain is quite complicated, how we generate value in an airline can now be quite complex. Are you going to go for the value add with free cups of coffee? Are you going to charge extras? Are you going to have technology built in? How is those different areas going to mingle? And chaotic? Well, chaotic is kind of what we went through in COVID-19. And COVID-19 is a great example of what happens when something is chaotic. Like here around the globe, it was chaotic. We had to act first, sense the resolve, and then we had to respond properly. So in New Zealand, it was very chaotic in the first couple of weeks. We acted, put some safeguards in, we sensed what happened, and then we responded with good practices afterwards. So in New Zealand here, we went from chaotic into complex, into now a complicated situation. So COVID-19 is a great example of an industry that can actually have the same problem go into multiple areas, depending on if you could streamline it. Another example of this could be simple as car manufacturing. It was very complex in the 1920s. It became very complicated throughout the 1960s and 1970s. To now, car manufacturing is actually quite simple. Now we need to add all these different extra value adds on there. And that's the reason why you have less competition in the automotive industry. And that's because it's become more streamlined, more commoditized. So think about this. When you think about this Kinetic model, start to think in terms of if it's more of a commodity, it's probably more simple. And if it's more greenfields, bespoke, it's normally chaotic or complex. You don't know what's going on. Make sense? So we start with red organizations. And why am I ignoring magenta or infrared? You're just not going to find them. There's even a thought process that red organizations are also phasing out, and this is probably a good thing. What I like to focus on is not only what is an organization that's red, but also when does it thrive. So red organizations have a constant fear. It's normally run by an individual or a set of individuals like a family. So small businesses can be red, and they do thrive in disorderly environments. And that's because in short-term environments of disorder, a top-down approach can actually have greater business outcomes. And we'll get to that a little bit later. They're very impulsive. They're called the wolf pack. I quite like that, the wolf pack. Gangs, mafia, ISIS, you get the drift. An organization doesn't have to be small to be red. It can be red. ISIS is pretty big, but normally it's quite small. It has a problem growing because of trust issues, and the pyramid normally collapses. So they normally stay quite small. The leadership style is predatory. So what we're focusing on in the red is a very small number of people running the company who don't allow much decision making, and the employees are more pawns in what they want to do. Okay, it can actually work in disorderly environments, but how many environments are disorderly? Amber organizations are most likely the organization that you're in currently. We've surveyed over 400 organizations, and we have found that amber is the most common. And even the medium average is just medium of amber. And we were quite surprised with this. We thought that orange, which we'll get to in a minute, was one of the most common, but it's not. Amber is actually very common. So take good information in on this amber section and have a think about similarities in your own organization. There are normally highly formal roles with a hierarchical pyramid. So CEO, heads, executive teams, specialists, knowledge workers. It's top-down command and control. They will determine what and the how. Okay? It's very efficient though. So in obvious environments, it does very well. The things that are commodity driven, an amber environment will actually work very well. It's conformist. They conform to whatever the natural industry lines are. They're not trying to be innovative. They're just trying to survive normally. Now, this is great for commodities. If you're in commodities or your strategy is actually to commoditize your products, if that's your strategy, amber all the way makes total sense. You don't need business agility. What you need to do is become very lean and to focus on bringing those products into your competitive advantage, which is normally low costs. If you think about low cost, product innovation, customer service, your part of the triangle is low cost. So by forcing it that way through strict process and pushing the products towards the commoditization section, you will do fine. As long as your customers still want your product or have to buy your products. It's a very repetitive nature. It presumes nothing's going to change. There's a great debate whether army is actually amber or not, and different parts of an army would be different, but it's called the army. The churches or most religious areas are amber. It's part of the first intersubjectivity thought process. Now, if you think about objectivity, when we scientifically measure something, and subjectivity, where it's how our internal thought processes work, intersubjectivity are things like religion, money, government. They're things that don't really exist mathematically or science-wise, but there's something that we all believe in and therefore they do exist, right? So think of it, that's how it all turned up originally with religion, and it's grown into something much larger now. Again, the army and government. There's nothing wrong with government being an amber organization. If the people of a democratically elected government want low-cost governance, then amber makes total sense for a government. And most public school, there's almost levels to increase. There's a test at the end of the year, and it's about efficiency, about getting as many people through the system as possible. It's not about outcomes. It's about just getting people through the system. Is that right or wrong for education? I'll let you decide. And as we go into orange, you'll find a lot of private schools have already gone to orange. You have to try and think about, is it outcome driven or is it output driven? Amber's very output driven. The leadership style of amber It's paternalistic, authoritative. And what does that actually mean? It means the boss knows best. And that's kind of where we're getting to on this. The boss knows best. And my boss knows best. And their boss knows best. And that's the whole point of the hierarchy. Amber, I think, personally started when Frederick Taylor started coming out with scientific analysis for management. And Frederick Taylor gets a bad name. Yes, a very neurotic person who was measuring the steps from his office to somewhere else. And if we think about it, open plan offices were his idea. So there was less walls involved. You can get somewhere faster. But here's some really good points. Managers and workers should talk more. So before this, managers were normally a different class, or they were people who were family friends. They were managers, and they didn't talk to the workers. They didn't need to. They just told them what to do, and they did it, right? He wanted more open communication. He wanted to pay people more for outcomes as well. So if you were to shovel more coal, you would get paid more. He also wanted to focus on education. So the coal shoveler, let's teach them how best to follow, to actually transport coal from one place to another, and then iterate from that. So I want to be clear. The positives for Frederick Taylor's scientific management is removing waste, develop workers, system thinking. Ford, through 1920s, leveraged the system massively to the 1960s. Open plan offices, all Frederick Taylor. One great story that I always enjoy about Frederick Taylor was he got a whole bunch of people to take the coal from one area to the next, and the next day chipped off a bit of the shovel. Now obviously these shovels are very heavy, so over time, the shovel got lighter, so they can do more backwards and forwards motions, but of course they take less coal. So he plotted that graph to find the optimal size of a shovel for coal. What I love about this is that's the reason why in Mitre 10, Bunnings, or whichever store that you get your hardware from, you will find different types of shovels for different jobs. Because this method meant you need a more efficient item, which created more commoditization for certain products. So it fueled markets, which is what I love the most. Any customer can have a car painted any color that he or she wants, so long as it's black. Henry Ford. Henry Ford did amazingly well in the 1920s. And when we think about why, it's because he could pump out cars at a lower cost than all the competition at the time. But what's wrong with that statement 100 years later? Did you get it? The customer doesn't have a choice. So what's changed since then? What caused this momentum to move on? Well, we had 2 world wars. And to rebuild from those world wars, we needed consumerism. To get out there, stop saving, start spending money, rebuild the economies, right? That was the whole plan. We also educated our population. And we educated them probably a little bit too much from an organization point of view. So now we have more intelligent people who know the power is in their hands, and the wars are quite far away. So when we think about this, what Henry Ford said about his car being black, people today will think that's crazy. I want a car that's what I want. And that's why Toyota, especially in the 1960s, with that pull system. And what is a pull system? If I want a red car, a car was painted red for me, and I would pull it, and another red car would be created. So they created a system that was very similar to Henry Ford, but instead of being pushed out to customers and expecting them to buy it, they only had things just in time. Slightly less efficient, but more productive. And that's that key difference there between efficiency and productivity. Just because you're pumping out something efficiently doesn't mean it's productive, because your customers may not want it anymore. Objectives are not fate, they are direction. They are not commands, they are commitments. They do not determine the future, they are the means to mobilize the resources and the energies of the business for making the future. Is that P. Drucker again? So, orange organizations were born. And what I love about orange organizations is that it's all goal driven. That's where we want to go. Head in that direction, the leadership will say. It's about pointing out the competition, profit, growth, the full capitalism way. It's saying what the problem is, but letting people know that they can deal with the how as well. Why is that? They do that because leaders in an orange organization, they know that they can't find the solution fast enough. But they know what the problem is because they're the specialists, right? They have the strategic knowledge. And these guys, the knowledge workers, they need to find out the how. It thrives in complicated environments. So when we think about things that are complicated, that don't require so much bespoke changes, then an orange environment is very well. It rewards the achiever. It's a machine. Like that, it's a machine. So the leadership style is kind of like goal and task orientated. Like, here's a goal, I want you to break up into tasks and get there for me. This all came around in the 1950s, 1960s, and has become very popular through the 1990s, 2000s. A little bit late, mind you. Your biggest companies in the world are all orange. Why? Because if they didn't become orange, they couldn't have become global companies. You cannot, from a leadership point of view, grow your company internationally through an amber environment. You just won't be able to adapt fast enough. You need to change the way you do things in China. You need to change the way you do things in male products versus female products. These things all change, and we need to be aware that they change. So that brings us to the end of this lesson. So what do we cover here? We covered really when we look at why things change in human adaptability and how we can adapt faster through cultural evolution, and understanding the different stages of those cultural evolutions. We understand that red is a fear-based system that normally smaller companies or organizations will have. We understood that amber was very good in the 1920s onwards for efficiency, commoditization, simple environments. And then we were introduced into orange. Orange really is all about those global companies, the what being done by leadership and the how being done by the organizational knowledge workers. And that's what we want to see. We want to see people move from amber to orange to bring them up to the speed where we are today in 2020. But as you can see, it's changed again. Through the 1990s, VUCA has become quite popular. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And what we find is because the world is becoming more and more complex, not just IT, but all of the individual industries now combining to create new products, different cultural changes, that orange no longer cuts the mustard. What we want to see is how do we adapt to these new changes? And that's what we're going to go over the next lesson. Thank you.